Hello. So just restarted that live as it wasn't going out properly. I'm just waiting for Lucy to join me. She's going to be talking all about the gut microbiome when weaning. A really relevant subject at the moment, as we're all talking about the good bacteria in our gut. So it's really important. So hopefully she'll be around in a moment. There she is. Hopefully the same problems that we had earlier this week.
Hello.
Hello. Again, nice to see you again.
You too. Sorry, my phone was like, no, this page doesn't exist. I was like, yes, it does.
It definitely does.
Yes, it does.
We, the reason we've been using Zoom and streaming into the group for the rest of the week is we had a few technical issues at the beginning of the week doing it this way. So I was on tenterhooks to see whether it would work, but it appears to be fine.
Bless you. Good. I'm glad it's working. We're there. I've got my technology hat back on.
If you have to switch it back on when you're sort of busy with children and stuff, you tend to forget about all of those things.
I forget everything at the moment. Absolutely everything.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us again. And this is our extra bonus live because I think it's such an important subject, and I think it's something that people are asking lots of questions about at the moment because there's so much focus and emphasis on promoting and supporting the good bacteria in the gut.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
That's what we're going to talk about.
We are. And you know what? You've hit the nail on the head because it is such a trendy, on the pulse topic. It's everywhere at the moment, isn't it? It's everybody wants to know, what can I do, how can I make it better, you know. And I think what's really interesting about that is, like, often people get lots of sort of the top line information, but sort of hopefully some of what I'll talk about today will sort of help set the scene a little bit as well. Sort of, because everyone's like, oh yeah, you know, it's good for my gut health. When you ask people, what do you mean by that, what's good, what's bad, all those sorts of things. So we're very happy to take questions, aren't we? If anybody's watching live and wants to catch up, you know, or even on catch up, if anyone's got any message, you know, questions, please feel free to just pop them over Facebook or Instagram or anything to me, and I will of course answer if I can.
Absolutely.
Are you happy for me to just go off on one like I did yesterday?
Yeah, just go for it, and I'll come back with any questions when necessary, and I might interrupt you and
please do. So gut health, it's very trendy. People want to ask me about it. They want to say, how can I make sure that I'm establishing a really healthy gut microbiome for my baby? And actually, I think a good starting point is, like, what is the gut microbiome? Like, it's actually quite sort of a bit of medical jargon, isn't it, really? And to put it really simply, and this is really quite simple, it is essentially the colony of bacteria, viruses, funguses, single cell organisms, and even some of the genes that they express in the gut. And a little bit, I always say, when we're thinking about what's going on down there, what we want is a nice healthy gut garden. So we want all those nice flowers that would come out and be there. They need to be fed like the flowers in your garden. They all need different things. And what we want are not too many of those weeds. So it really helps. An analogy always really helped me when I was studying science at university. So, and essentially there are lots of things that can help the good flowers, the good trees, the good bushes grow, and there are things that can make it more difficult or a more hostile environment for them to grow and or lead to those weeds that I have, by the way, out in the front of my house that I'm not on top of, proliferating and being a little bit more. And the reason why this is important is because what we are understanding now is that gut health and what's going on in terms of the gut microbiome has a significant impact, not just on short-term health. You know, lots of people ask me, what should I do because my baby's got reflux or colic or, you know, constipation? So there are definitely factors that we can think about there, but also what we understand is that now when we look at risk of long-term disease and long-term health, there's probably a lot of interplay between what's going on in the gut and the rest of the body, and that's because it has a role in mediating the immune system. We actually have 70% of our sort of immune system cells sort of sit within the gut. The gut talks to the brain a lot. People will have heard of the gut-brain axis. It's fascinating when you start reading. I mean, when I started reading on this topic, as it sort of reared its head above the parapet and started to become sort of trendy and people were talking about it, there is so much information out there. So for parents listening, I think what's important is, like anything else, I'm quite pragmatic. You don't need to get overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, I now need to think about that on top of everything else I need to think about during weaning. I think bringing it down to sort of what can you impact and what can't you impact. And I think that's another thing that I want to talk about, is that when your baby is born, essentially they have a relatively, for want of a better term, sterile gut. So they're not populated. And from the moment they're born, and the moment even of mode of delivery, whether they're born sort of out the sunroof, C-section, or whether they have normal vaginal delivery, then essentially that starts the process of accruing and building up the bacteria in the gut. And then there are various factors that then can contribute to what's down there, what's growing or what's perhaps not growing in the amounts that we might want there to be. So there are lots of positive factors for gut health. So in terms of getting, you know, a good healthy gut microbiome, and that can include things like breastfeeding, that can include things like not having lots of antibiotics, and actually being in, there's really good evidence around, you know, people who grow up, you know, outside on farms. I always say, let your kids get dirty.
And animals as well.
Animals, yeah, our furry friends are absolutely brilliant. All of these have really positive impacts on gut microbiome. Actually saw a brilliant video, I bet loads of people have seen it, it's sort of doing rounds on social media, of a little girl out in her mum or dad's garden who was literally like doing an angel in the dirt and had it on her face and was eating it. And I thought, she must have a nice healthy gut for her. Lovely. And even things like exposure to people. So, you know, I always think back to our COVID babies, you know, when it comes to this, you know, actually exposure to other people, it can be a really, really good thing. I know we all go, oh my gosh, keep away because please don't give my child the cold or the rotavirus or anything else that's going around. But actually socialization is a good thing for our gut microbiome. And of course, then at the point at which we start weaning and food, well, you know, what children are eating too. And then there are other ways that we can positively benefit sort of the gut microbiome if we need to. So use of probiotics and perhaps even probiotic or prebiotic foods and those sorts of things. Parents will also probably be very aware that there are things that perhaps have a little bit more of a kind of undesirable impact on the gut microbiome. So things like antibiotics, you know, and sometimes, quite frankly, babies and children do need them, and we would never say don't have them if you need them, but you know, often we don't want to see them overprescribed or given just sort of willy-nilly. Things like the lack of mixing, so not socializing, lots of sort of use of detergents, all those sorts of things, and you know,
antibacterial washing,
antibacterial everything, don't bath the babies in Dettol, and those sorts of things. And also a lack of, when you start moving through to food, when we're thinking about food, a sort of a lack of good variety there, and perhaps more consumption of things like those ultra processed foods, and even things like sort of jarred foods, sterile foods, those sorts of things, you know. And so I hope what's quite clear is that it's not just a one thing that is going to have, you know, going to be thinking about your child's gut. And in reality, there are going to be lots of things that are completely outside of your control. You know, so, you know, mode of delivery, how baby's born, you know, you can have the best intentions in the world. You know, I only gave birth 4 months ago. You know that very much it is kind of what happens when you're there. So lots and lots of things. So weaning is, however, one of those things where you can have a little bit of influence, and I'd say it's weaning and beyond, really. It's not just that kind of 6-month period that gets all that attention. It's really thinking into early childhood, and actually there's some really lovely research that shows that sort of diversification of all of those bugs in a child's gut and the gut microbiome really sort of diverses and develops until around 3 years of age. And whilst it can continue to change, those foundations sit within that first 1,000 days, and then a bit further if you're thinking about up to 3, in terms of laying some positive foundations. So we do have a bit of a window of opportunity with a child's gut to be positively impacting it, which may well then have an impact on their sort of future health. Does that all make sense so far? I'm just
Yeah,
going off.
absolutely. No, it really does, and it's I think what we're starting to realise as well is the impact of this gut health on things like immunity and things like that, which all ties into that first 1,000 days of, and focusing on this time as a point to make good foundations.
Yeah, it really is. And there, you know, I know parents have so much to juggle in these first few years of life, but it is why nutrition is important, and it is why also thinking about if you've had things along the way that have compromised your, you know, your ability to perhaps get variety into your child. Maybe that's allergies, maybe that's a child with reflux or colic or whatever it might be, or, you know, a child who's unfortunately been repeatedly unwell and on lots of antibiotics. It's empowering parents with things that they can do or things that they can give. So people always say to me, Lucy, like, what are your top tips for, you know, helping my baby have a healthy gut? So if we're thinking about weaning onwards, you know, I would always say, you know, there's fantastic evidence around breastfeeding. I think breastfeeding needs lots more support in the UK. You know, when you delve into what's in, you know, breast milk, it's absolutely fascinating, the impact of some of these factors that don't have a nutritional benefit and seem to be there very much to help modulate sort of what's growing in the gut. But of course, it's not easy and it's not appropriate for everybody. So weaning is a point where you can have a little bit more control. So if there is one key message, it is variety. Variety, and particularly variety with those plant-based foods that everyone will have heard are good for their gut. And that doesn't mean you have to be trying to get the sauerkraut into your baby every day and the kefir, and because I mean, to be honest, it's probably the age they take it because there's such strong flavors. You know, I think I've only just about got onto that sort of fit. You know, I'm a bit like, ooh, it's a bit too tangy for me.
I've just introduced kefir to my daughter because, you know, she's still quite accepting, and I thought, oh, well, let's give it a go, and she's happy with it. So.
No, absolutely, those sorts of things, and Greek yogurt and that sort of stuff can be great sort of prebiotic food. So when we think about variety, I always say, let's think about what we want to give. So we want to give lots of different fruits and vegetables. They have lots of different fibers, lots of different antioxidants, lots of different, you know, variety in the sort of types of sugars and things like that that they provide, which can be really beneficial for the gut. But also when we think beyond that, you know, I want to say, when people say plants, they think vegetables and fruit. And actually, you know, I'm always conscious, particularly when we're talking about a weaning baby, that, you know, we're not going to be saying they need a really, really high fiber diet. You know, they do not need that 30 grams that we do as adults. In fact, that could fill up their little tummies quite quickly. But, you know, you can balance that with some high fat foods that are plant-based, so ground nuts and seeds, peanut butter, those sorts of things. Of course, avocado, exactly. Adding in, you know, different types of, you know, olive oil, all these sorts of things, alongside perhaps different grains, and even things like herbs and spices count. And I say, you know, that's great. You know, that is actually a really easy way to add variety. You know, you don't have to think about a plate of 5 different foods every day, because people don't have time for that. They don't have money for that at the moment. It's about going, oh, do you know what? We've got some mint in the garden that's going crazy, because it always does. You know, let's put that in the peas and avocado today. And you've added a different flavour, which from a kind of weaning perspective, experience perspective, gives the child a lot more to roll with, but it's also not plant-based food. So again, it's variety as much as you can, and as much as is feasible. But again, I would encourage parents to think about it pragmatically within a family meal and setup. You know, do you cook with beans? Can you give lentils, beans, legumes, kidney beans that you would put or add into things like chili? Could you put some lentils in a bolognese? And you know,
I always put a can of lentils and a can of red kidney beans into my spaghetti bolognese. Because that's normal for the kids. They also barely, even their friends don't notice it.
I would say green lentils go really well. Red lentils you can cook almost to a mush. Like they can almost like sort of disintegrate into other big dishes. And things like ground nuts and seeds, you know, I will always say, put my allergy hat on for a minute, that be careful when you're introducing, you know, your nuts, but actually they're a fantastic sort of source of fiber. They're a fantastic source of healthy fats. They've got loads of benefits, and you can quite frankly sprinkle them on loads of things. You know, you can pop it on yogurt, porridge, you know, your breakfast cereals, but you can also quite easily stir it into or onto like pasta dishes or into curries and stuff like that. Like I always add ground almonds to some curry. So it's trying to make it doable and manageable without feeling overwhelming, because I think weaning feels overwhelming enough without something else to do. So lots of variety. Thinking about easy wins, like we say, easy and cheap wins, cans of lentils and beans, you know.
They bulk out. Like the other reason is because it takes less minutes, the expensive part of it. Try and bulk it out with plant-based foods.
Plant-based foods, yeah, absolutely. And then things, as I say, like your nuts and seeds. And also, you know, I say things like, when you go and buy your frozen fruit, which, you know, I think's great, it's cheaper, you don't have to worry about, you know, whether it's in season or not, and therefore whether it's going to taste any good or not. And, you know, it's so much more cost effective, and it's there, and you can bang it in the microwave if you need to. You know, pick a mixed one. So don't just pick the strawberries, pick one that's got, you know, the mixed berries in it, or a smoothie type mix. And that way, again, really easy ways to add variety without it being too intimidating. You just pick a different one on rotation in the shops every week, for example. The other thing I would say when it comes to weaning, and actually it's a really interesting conversation I often have with families, is that often the ones who've had a tricky journey, so refluxy babies who've had really, you know, really rubbish colic that has been quite horrendous for families to manage, and they sometimes, you know, between the age of 4 to 6 months of age, feel like they're overcoming and finally getting over that hurdle, and things are improving, and then they are absolutely and understandably quite petrified about starting weaning. I've just got my baby sleeping, or they're just happy, we've finally got to a baby group, what do you mean I need to suddenly do this, what happens if it upsets their tummy? So what I would say is that with that group, what I often see is a lot of reservation about offering variety, and there can be some quite old hat advice out there, one new food every 3 days, etc, etc. I would be very careful with that, because actually what it does is usually limits a range of foods that child's being exposed to. And I think, you know, I've popped this in a blog for people to read as well, it's about 10 foods a month if you did that. You don't have, unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of endless time when it comes to these developmental windows of opportunity either.
Absolutely.
So from both sides, I would say, unless you're thinking about allergenic foods, which I always say, be much more cautious, don't mix them up, don't give peanut on the same day.
That's a different thing.
Yeah. But otherwise, don't be afraid to just, you know, do different vegetables and fruits and things like that on different days. And, you know, if you do have a refluxy baby and you are struggling, thinking about a food and symptom diary, but also thinking about, is it because, you know, is it because there are other things going on? I often see babies who start weaning and they get constipated because, oh my gosh, this all of a sudden the gut's having to deal with a lot more than just milk in terms of a digestion point of view. So there's this period of transition as the bowels sort of reset a little bit. And I find my constipated baby's reflux gets worse because often there's a lot of intra-abdominal pressure, more's going in, less is coming out. All of a sudden, actually, this is really quite uncomfortable. But there are, you know, there are lots of things that affect that. I always talk about, you know, things that affect gastric emptying as well. You know, sometimes those higher fat foods sit around in the stomach for longer. So it's very nuanced area, and I would say don't be tempted to just go into over restriction, and don't be tempted to take on any advice that's, you know, that can't tell you why. I always smile when people sit in my clinic and they say, oh, I've been told, you know, my child can't have, I don't know, corn until they're 3. And I say, why? Well, because they can't digest it. Why? If you can give me right to the end, which is, you know, science, because I know when everyone goes, oh, I don't know, but it's because people are desperate, and it really frustrates me. So yeah, don't limit it. If possible, don't limit it. I would say there is a very, very, very small percentage of children where they really do need quite specialized advice, and they may have multiple food allergies, there may be other things going on that we need to be thinking about, and they should really sort of be under a specialist panel, and like a dietitian, a doctor, etc. You know, and the role of a dietitian, and everyone, you know, back in the day thinks it's our job to be taking things out of people's diets. It's completely the opposite. Our job is to help liberalize as much as possible. So yes, so don't take old hat advice, get in lots of variety. We've sort of talked a little bit, haven't we, about those pre and probiotic foods. So you've got your probiotics, which are delivering the actual bacteria, you know, they contain good, healthy, friendly bacteria, and we want that to get to the gut. And then there's prebiotic foods, they're essentially the food for good bacteria. So I've included a little bit more. I'm going to say, go and read the blog.
Yes, we've put a link up to the blog actually on the comment stream. So
fabulous. You can go and have a little read of that. And then sort of the $1 million question people always ask me is, you know, alongside, it's a little bit like the vitamin supplement kind of aisle. More and more now people are saying, should I just be giving my child a probiotic? Now, I think we need to think about why we're doing that. And there is absolutely a role of the use of probiotics on an individual basis with children. And there's some really, really positive studies coming out about looking at things like constipation, particularly colic, for example. Bigay have absolutely tons of research on that. Even things like reflux, there's lots going on in the background, and I don't want to say too much because there'll also be lots of studies sort of, I think, starting to come out. But what I would encourage people to do is to not just pick something willy-nilly off the shelf. What you want to be thinking is this a good quality probiotic? And again, people say to me, how do I pick that? So you're looking at something that has got a really good evidence base. So essentially what that means is lots of studies have been done on this to show that it is safe and it is effective, and particularly with probiotics, that they actually reach the gut, because there's no benefit to anything that doesn't make it there.
No.
Like,
it's destroyed in the stomach.
It's destroyed in the stomach. It's not, so you want something that's there. You want something that has a good count, a good amount of bacteria, sort of in the millions, billions usually, and a good probiotic will be able to tell you what that is. And actually, ones that sit on the shelf, they do generally decrease, but a good probiotic will always base that on sort of what they would expect that number to be, even at the point that it was sort of best before, if that makes sense. So you want to be looking at that. You want to be looking at a form that your baby is able to take. They can't take big tablets, and you don't necessarily want to be adding things into their food and that might be sort of affecting the taste. So think about one that's easy to get in, and that essentially also has a strain of bacteria that you want, because some of them are single strains of bacteria and some of them are multiple. Look at all these ones that we put in, and let's be quite frank, even I didn't know what half of these did maybe 5-8 years ago.
There are so many. There is not a one size fits all. It really is
it's not. So you want to be thinking about, why am I using it? Have I checked everything else too? Because by all means, it's not necessarily going to be a magic, a silver bullet if your child is really struggling. And what I would say is, in my clinic, often we will suggest the use of specific probiotics as an adjunct to everything else. And they're only ever going to work as long as they're used. So everyone always says to me, do you do a course of antibiotics? And you go, no, not necessarily. You want to keep going, and if you find they do have benefit, then you need to probably keep them going. So lots to think about. Do have a chat and think, why am I taking it? Do a little bit of research on what's going on for your baby and why you think you might want to be using it. Just as a heads up, lots of people will say to me, can I give a probiotic and will it prevent allergies? There's not good evidence about that yet. I mean, it will be interesting to see. Again, it is a hugely evolving area. And I mean, it's one of those things that is associated with nutrition, that we have the advice now. I suspect when I'm practicing in 5-10 years time, we will have something different that we will be saying.
I know, even from when I graduated, how far this research has come on in the last 10 years.
It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. I was at a conference last year. It is fascinating what is coming out, and it's really hard to kind of hold on the reins and not be like, all of these things could be really, really beneficial. But what I would say is, don't do that and not look at dietary variety, anything else that is going on in the environment for your child. It needs to be really holistically looking at a child and thinking about all the factors that you can impact on. I would love to say, the simplest thing to do if your child has X is give Y. Wouldn't we all love a really simple, but
the magic bullet.
Often it's multiple things. And my final thing I would say is, don't put yourself under too much pressure. I'm always conscious when I'm talking about these sort of very trendy topics or things that are right on the front of people's agenda, that people go, oh my God, Lucy, you've just given me something else to think about, and I need to think about iron-rich foods, and I need to think about introducing allergens, and I need to think about their skill development and the water, and now you've given me something else to do. It doesn't have to be like that. It can just be, right, I'm trying to offer variety for my baby during weaning. Off we go.
Absolutely. And you made a good point as well about the amount of research, and the BioGaia website I know has got loads of evidence-based information on there that's really informative and great for parents.
And what you need is something that breaks that down, because whilst it can be my job to read all of these randomized controlled trials and everyone goes, what, Lucy? And translate that right down to the patient in front of me, good companies will be able to say, these are the studies we've done, these are why they're high quality studies. And I've used an example there. Randomized control trial is a really, really high quality study. And what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know, what does that mean for you, for your baby? And, you know, here's how you can read more. And I think, you know, transparency with those sorts of things is really, really important.
Yeah.
You know, and saying this is why you should use this with your baby, because, you know, if your child's had, you know, diarrhea for weeks because they've been on antibiotics, it might be that a different strain of probiotic is needed, or, you know, you want to think about something else entirely. So it's about targeting it to you and your baby and finding something that they can take and is well evidence-based.
Perfect. That's really interesting, and I think it's probably given people lots of food for thought.
Yes.
And yeah, really great. Thank you.
No, you're so very, very welcome. I saw someone put something, but I can't look back through the comments.
Oh, it's Ria. It was Ria in the office, I think. And she said, yeah, we need to eat more dirt.
Yeah. Do you know what's really interesting? It's really fascinating at the moment. So my daughter's 4 months old, and she is at that stage where everything, absolutely everything, is going in her mouth. Everything. Yeah. I can't read a book or do anything with her or play with a single toy. Doesn't matter the texture, doesn't matter everything that we're doing. She wants to go in her mouth. Her feet are in her mouth. And I you know, whilst that's obviously there's a huge amount in terms of kind of her gross motor development that's going on, what really fascinates me is I'm like, I wonder if there is another reason for this, because she's having lots of contact with lots of different things at the moment.
Connecting her with her world around her, with what's, you know, that connection, the bacteria.
Literally what's in it.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm just like, oh, we won't go around cleaning them all up with, you know, anti-bac wipes, you know, as long as it's not really dirty. Well, I'm just like, she's fine.
There's a lot to be said, isn't there, about exposure, and the research shows it as well. The exposure to the germs, when we actually try and clean things up too much, we have a very negative effect on the immune system, because the immune system is something that needs to be taught. It needs learning periods.
Exposure.
Yeah, exactly. So
that's what I say. I talk about this analogy as well. You know, the whole time it's about telling it something so that it can start to build and evolve.
Yes, and learn.
Exactly.
Well,
anyway,
we shall get back to your daughter. And thank you once again. Thank you once again. And your blog is up on the website, and we've linked it in the chat here. And we will speak to you very soon.
Yeah, look after yourself. Enjoy the rest of Weaning Week.
Lovely. Thanks, Lucy. Bye.
Bye.